Well, I hope that you can hear me. My name is Mike Tess, and this is the beginning of our first webinar for 2012 for the Ultrasound Guidelines Council. I'd like to welcome everybody that's on. Currently we have over 30 people involved in this webinar. We'll probably add a few in the next few minutes, but I'm glad you're here. You should be able to see on your screen you can ask questions. Unless it's really urgent, I'd like you to wait until we listen to our three panelists before you ask your question. If you're not able to hear or something like that, then we'll try to help you with that as well. We are going to try to record this webinar as we have in the past and make it available for viewing later for those who are unable to attend tonight. You might be interested to know that those of us who organize this, the software that we use allows us to not only identify who's online and who's paying attention. So if you're if you have the webinar hooked up to your computer, but you're actually surfing the web on another window, we can tell that. And so in the interest of you getting a good experience, I hope that you'll pay attention and not be viewing something else, and we hope that we've got something worthwhile for you. I'd like to remind you that our next webinar is next week, next Thursday, so it's a week from this Thursday, the 22nd of August, the same time, and we'll be talking about ultrasound machinery for the future and from a lab's perspective. I'd like to thank our tech committee, which is made up of Donnie Robertson, Susan McCaleb, and Sonia Gregory. They're the ones that helped design the education program and including the webinars, and they approve the final programs as well, and so I want to thank them for their work and their efforts in putting this together. Our topic tonight is a look at the use of DNA in the genetic evaluation of carcass traits, and particularly from a breed perspective. We've had a couple presentations in the last 2 years about DNA, but wanted to tonight look at how the breeds might differ in their approach to using DNA to help evaluate carcass traits, and I've asked 3 different breed associations to be represented tonight. The first speaker is going to be Dr. Sally Northcutt from the American Angus Association. I would expect that many of you either know Sally personally or have heard her speak in other venues, and we're grateful that Sally's here. Sally has been with the Angus Association for several years. Prior to that, she was an extension specialist at Oklahoma State University. She's a native of Kentucky. She is currently the Director of Genetic Research for the American Angus Association and Angus Genetics Incorporated, the arm of the Angus Association that does their genetic evaluation. I think it's probably safe to say that anything that do with genetic evaluation with the Angus Association, Sally has her fingers on it, and that she and her colleagues have been busy in the last several years. They've added a lot to their genetic evaluation, and many changes have taken place, and she might talk about some of that. Sally has served on the Beef Improvement Federation Board of Directors and contributed a lot with that. She's also an award winner from BIF. And so with that little introduction, I'd like to welcome Sally to our webinar and thank you in advance for agreeing to do this. Sally.
Thank you, Dr. Tess and Kathy Schaefer. I sure appreciate your help in making this endeavor possible. What I'd like to do tonight is briefly share with you our approach on incorporating genomic results into expected progeny differences, or EPDs. And you'll hear those called Genomic-Enhanced EPDs. Right now at the association, all of our EPDs would include genomic results with the exception of the heifer pregnancy EPD. And today I'm going to focus primarily on the suite of CarcassTraits and how we've approached that, although the math is quite similar for the whole suite of EPDs. In the first slide, I've just depicted what you're very most familiar with in terms of the information that can contribute to EPDs. We simultaneously incorporate this information into the genetic evaluation. There can be individual records, pedigree, progeny data, as well as the genomic result in varying amounts. So, for example, a baby calf that we have pedigree information on at the association has a genomic result come in, and through that procedure we're able to fill in all their boxes for the EPDs and the appropriate accuracies. The approach that we've taken at the American Angus Association is what you'll hear termed as a correlated trait approach, or that we use the molecular breeding values or that genomic result as an indicator trait. So in our models, it's like fitting an additional trait into that system. In the next slide, I've depicted the pieces of information that come into our genomic-enhanced carcass EPDs that you see published for carcass weight, marbling, and rib and fat. Right now, we're well on our way to having close to 100,000 harvest carcass records, and that ends up being the core piece, or that economically relevant piece for us, and so that's why the EPDs for carcass are expressed in those harvest type traits, marbling score, for example, and carcass weight in pounds. We also have a huge and dynamic resource of 1.5 million scan records that have been collected since about 1998. Those ultrasound measures, as you're familiar with, are also fit as an indicator trait. We established those genetic associations between the harvest data and the scan measures. And then in fall of 2009, we began to include genomic results in that analysis as well. Right now, there's 66,000 roughly genomic pieces that go into that weekly genetic evaluation to derive the set of carcass EPDs that are available to our breeders each week. Another example of an indicator trait approach that you might be familiar with is we publish calving ease EPDs, and we fit birth weights as an indicator trait. So it's not uncommon to take this approach. So all these sources of information are pulled together on a weekly basis by Tuesday at 4:30 our time here at the office. Any new information that's come in, whether it's the scan data or the genomic results, go into the evaluation that'll kick off later tonight, and then the breeders have those updated EPDs available to them on their breeder account, and then live on the web as well on our website for Friday morning about 8 o'clock our time. So we have a huge indicator trait resource of those scan measures, and just as an update, the following graph depicts the last 3 years in July of where we stand in terms of ultrasound records. Right now, we're up 1.2% to date on our fiscal counts of scan records. So we're over 101,000 as of the end of July. So that is really stabilized, and those data points continue to roll in each week. What I'd like to share with you next is an example of when information is added, how the accuracies on the EPDs are impacted. And just simplistically on the following diagram, if we just looked at an example bull, we'll call him Bull A. If he just has pedigree information, a pedigree estimate, half the sire, half the dam, and we generate a pedigree estimated EPD, we give that a flat accuracy of 0.05 just for simplicity for our breeders, and then they have the I flagger, the interim flag, to know that we've just taken half the sire and half the dam EPDs when those are available through the National Cattle Evaluation. In this particular example, I've added a phenotypic scan record on this bull in the evaluation, and you'll see down in the blue section that those EPDs were affected by that bull represented in a proper contemporary group. And the accuracies similarly jump up. And so that information would be available to that breeder on Friday morning once that scan data entered our house by Tuesday afternoon. So that's an example of that accuracy bump when scan data are incorporated into a non-parent bull, for example. And we could have done a similar example for heifers. Next, I'd like to share with you a similar format. We'll call this Bull B, a different animal. Again, a pedigree estimate up here at the top. And I've just gone ahead and shared with you the marbling EPD and the ribeye EPD. We could have done a similar piece on carcass weight and the fat EPD too. So in this bull, we went from a pedigree estimate to adding his 50K information, in this case is Zoetis information, genomic result fit as a correlated trait. It's a molecular breeding value that arrives here to our place, and the EPDs change, and then you'll see a considerable accuracy bump through the incorporation of that genomic result. By adding that genomic result, we could do an assessment of saying, well, is it equal to a certain number of progeny? And depending on the trait, across our whole suite of traits, that could be from anywhere from 8 to 20 calves, just as a ballpark number that we share with breeders. Sometimes that helps them better understand the accuracy impact. If we went ahead and added a scan record to this bull too, you'd see that additional accuracy bump somewhere in the order of 0.07. And so you'd get an additional bump, but it's not completely additive, of course, with the previous slide. So you get an additional piece there, but not double the amount, for example. One thing that's important when breeders purchase genomic tests and are anxious and excited for those to enter their EPD suite, they need to keep in mind that not only do those accuracies move, but again, those EPDs change as well. And I've just provided an example of a set of animals we pulled off on one weekly evaluation in this graph to share with you. And I've just depicted the ribeye EPD change when we pulled off about 650 non-parent animals, and we looked at their pedigree estimate first as they were entering the National Cattle Evaluation, and said, well, how much is their EPD going to change when we put the 50K piece in? And so the graph just gives you a count. You'll see a sizable number of animals. Their EPD didn't change at all for ribeye. And then to either side of that, you'll note that some of the EPDs changed in a negative fashion, and some of those had a positive change in kind of that bell-shaped distribution of those changes. And this is just an example of 650 animals pulled off, but typically it's a good message to share with people, and we could have done a similar picture, adding scan data to non-parents as well, and been able to illustrate that some of the EPDs go up, some go down, and some stay the same. And you have a few animals out on the tails, as you would expect. So in wrapping up my comments for now, you've seen our approach in terms of a correlated trait approach or indicator traits, and I really think big picture we need to very much respect the benefits of this approach, because we're able to improve our selection tools on non-parent animals with their scan data coming in or their genomic data arriving, or the combination of the two. And you saw those accuracy bumps compared to that pedigree estimate. We also see the EPDs change as well. One of the nice features of our weekly EPDs is that we're able to incorporate those indicator traits in quite rapidly. And then if your EPDs are modified by indicator traits, be it genomics or ultrasound measures, then the indexes change as well. So you have that pull-through component too. These are very nice for letting us characterize Angus genetics on traits that are difficult to measure. CarcassTraits are quite popular with our breeders and users of Angus genetics. And finally, on using the genomic results to generate EPDs, we've had quite a bit of uptake in embryo transfer or ET calves and differentiating those more fully across the suite of EPDs. And then it's also assisted breeders that end up with a single animal contemporary group, such as bull test. They're able to fill in those EPD profiles as well on those calves. And with that, that's my closing slide, and I'll turn that control back over, please.
All right, thank you, Sally. We'll have some time for questions and discussion among all three speakers at the end of our time today. Our next speaker is Dr. Lauren Hyde from the American Simmental Association. I noticed that on her slide she's also showing that she's also employed by the Red Angus Association, so that's something new for me. I didn't know that. I'm sorry, Lauren. Lauren is the lead geneticist for the multi-breed genetic evaluation that's done by, managed by the American Simmental Association. And Lauren is involved with not only the genetic evaluation of Simmental and Canadian Simmental, but Red Angus now partners with Simmental in their genetic evaluation, as does Gelby, and there may be others that I'm forgetting tonight. In the last few years, Simmental Association has done a lot of work to enter the genomic age, and now also publishes Genomic-Enhanced EPDs, and Lauren's going to explain some of that. Lauren actually lives in Colorado, and recently was presented with the Continuing Service Award by the Beef Improvement Federation this past year. So congratulations, Lauren. And with that little introduction, we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. DNA technology really isn't new to the genetic evaluation business. In fact, Simmental Association was the first association to include DNA in its EPDs with the Warner-Bressler Shear Force EPD. It was developed 10 years ago by Dick Quaz from Cornell University. in collaboration with the National Beef Cattle Evaluation Consortium and the NCBA Carcass Merit Project. And the results of this work were first published in the Simmental's Fall 2004 Sire Summary. Now, essentially what the test includes, it's based on some research done by U.S. Meat Animal Research Center, in which they discovered 2 markers in the calpain-1 gene that were associated with tenderness. And these markers just, they were called 316 and 530. And Dick noticed when he analyzed these markers with Simmental data, he found that the genotypes at each marker, each different genotype, had a different effect on Werner-Bressler shear force. And it turns out that marker 316 was the most informative, that had the biggest effect, and that the CC genotype at that marker was associated with more tender beef. And so he combined that information, the genotypic data on Simmental sires, with actual shear force data from the Carcass Merit Project on those sires' progeny. And he got slightly more accurate EPDs, especially on animals that had low accuracy to begin with. So this is really why we're so interested in DNA technology today, is because the goal of it is to leverage that technology to get higher accuracy faster on seed stock animals, especially for traits that are either expensive to measure, like feed intake, say, or that have delayed data points, like carcass. You know, for in a normal carcass evaluation program, you know, it takes, you know, 3 to 4 years for a sire to get enough progeny to get decent accuracy on those carcass EPDs. So the Simmental Association decided to look into developing other DNA tests in spring of 2012. And they had about 3,000 DNA samples on Simmental animals, in addition to both Sim-Angus and Simbra. And they genotyped these samples. Most of them were done with 50K SNP panels, but there were some with the 700K. And they also supplied millions of phenotypes on these animals, on the whole population. And these are primarily in the form of deregressed EPDs on 15 different traits, in addition to some actual performance data. And all these data were analyzed by Dorian Garrick and Matti Sachi at Iowa State in conjunction with the National Beef Cattle Evaluation Consortium. And they first had to establish like a training type population. And during the training part of the analysis, they used software to look at associations between the SNP effects, the effects that they got from the SNPs, and the traits of interest that we had, all 15 traits, which included, you know, several carcass traits. And then they developed equations that translated these SNP effects into MBVs, or molecular breeding values. And after they did the training, then they had to validate the analysis, so just to see how well these molecular breeding values predicted genetic merit from phenotypes and regular EPDs. And to do this, they had to compute the genetic correlation between the MBVs and the traits of interest. And genetic correlations, if you square the values, you get the percent of genetic variation in the trait that's explained by that molecular breeding value. And this right here shows what kind of values they got. If you look on the right-hand column, this is a Simmental values, the percent genetic variation for various traits on the left. And if you compare these to what Angus initially had from their Identity panel and their Pfizer panel, you'll see that the ASA numbers are comparable to or even higher than what Angus was getting. So, which is good news, because the higher the genetic variation, the more of a boost in accuracy we can get from these tests. And if you look down here with the carcass traits, we have carcass weight and marbling and ribeye area were all very high. Back fat, not so much. That was the lowest one that we saw. But there really isn't that much variation in back fat for overall. And then shear force was also moderately high. If we just kind of look at what this means, graphically, if we look at, say, back fat, which has almost a 10% genetic variation explained, we see that the test will slightly improve accuracies on these lower accuracy animals, as depicted by these light colored boxes. That's about the boost in accuracy you're going to get from using the MBV on a trait like back fat. But you'll see that it quickly has no effect. Even for an animal with a 0.5 accuracy or even a 0.4 accuracy, having a test for a trait with a low percent of genetic variation is really not going to make that much of a difference. But then if we look at a trait like marbling, which does have I believe it is 40% genetic variation, we see that boost in accuracy is a lot more. And it does actually make, with animals that have that start out with a 0.5 accuracy, it actually boosts their accuracy up a little bit as well. And it doesn't level off until higher levels of 0.7 and 0.75. And we could just look at this for various traits, like if an animal starts out with a certain accuracy, either a 0 or a 0.2 or a 0.4 or a 0.6, we can see how that DNA test is going to improve the accuracy on that animal. Traits like birth weight, for example, had a higher percent genetic variation, so that boost in accuracy is going to be higher than for a trait like back fat, which had that 8% genetic variation. And additionally, if we look at different breed groups within the ASA's population, we see that starting out with an accuracy of 0, which is associated with an animal with a parental average EPD, we see that for various populations, that boost in accuracy is going to be either higher or lower. Like if we look over at marbling, Sim Angus and purebred Simmentals, that test is going to give them a 19 to 20 accuracy levels, but for Simbra it's going to be a little bit lower. And then for shear force, we see that the purebred will get a boost of 0.22 in accuracy, but it doesn't affect the Simbra really at all. And we can also look at these values in terms of progeny equivalence, and these are the values averaged over all purebred Simmental, Sim Angus, and Simbra. And these numbers represent the number of progeny with performance that are needed to achieve the same increase in accuracy as what the MBV does for an animal that starts out with just a parental estimate or a 0 accuracy. So for example, for carcass weight, that test is going to be equivalent to having 4 progeny with carcass weights already. And if you look at marbling, ribeye, and back fat, these numbers in the parentheses represent how many ultrasound progeny that test would be equivalent to. Like the numbers here would be actual carcass, harvest records, but the numbers in the parentheses would be the ultrasound. And you can see that it takes more ultrasound records to achieve the same boost in accuracy as it does for carcass record, or that it does for carcass records. But this kind of makes sense because ultrasound is just an indicator for the actual carcass trait. So it's so it's going to take more ultrasound records to be equivalent to that carcass trait. So this just brings us back to what the actual goal is of what we're trying to accomplish with DNA technology. And the ASA was very encouraged to see how these tests could improve the accuracy on these lowly accurate animals. But before they put it in the EPDs, they wanted to they really needed a framework to incorporate those. So they adopted the BIF guidelines, stand on DNA technology, which just says that the BIF believes that information from DNA tests only has value in selection when incorporated with all other available forms of performance information for economically important traits in NCE, and when communicated in the form of an EPD with corresponding BIF accuracy. And what this means essentially, if you just focus on the 2 points, the first 2 bullet points, is that DNA test results are just another piece of information, just like weights and ultrasound measurements. And the MBVs only have value when they're combined with these pieces with all available pieces of information to create EPDs for economically important traits. And the MBVs should not be published in addition to their corresponding EPDs. But if you look at these 2 points, MBVs are just one component of the whole genetic evaluation system, along with the software, the pedigree information that we have, and the performance data, or also known as phenotypes. And what this means is that we will always need phenotypes. And if we keep in mind that we're trying to improve accuracy, MBVs only explain part of the genetic variation in a trait, which limits the amount of accuracy that can be attained for an individual animal. And MBVs on progeny just, they do not increase the animals, the parent's accuracy value at all. So we need phenotypes to account for additional genetic variation and to give that, and to increase the accuracy. And the animal's own record will give it just a little bit of a boost, but the progeny records are the key. And we also need phenotypes to train and retrain and validate and revalidate these 50K tests, because populations do change over time, and the predictive power of MBVs does too because of this change. So we need these phenotypes to monitor the effectiveness of the DNA tests. So the impact of DNA on ultrasound, I think that ultrasound is still a cheap, fast, non-invasive way to get carcass data on large numbers of progeny. And it does have a better potential for increasing EPD accuracy than just using MBVs alone, because you do get the large numbers of progeny. And the increase in scans over the past year, despite the availability of DNA tests, shows that people really are still doing it. Like Mike sent some statistics that the ASA has increased its number of scans 5.7% this past year over the year before, which is good news. So in my opinion, I think that ultrasound is here to stay. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you very much. Our third speaker today is Larry Keenan. Larry serves as the Director of Performance Programs for the Red Angus Association of America, Director of Breed Improvement. He's an Oklahoma native and an Oklahoma State grad. He serves on the BIF Board of Directors, and he's also the chairman of the UGC Board of Directors. So there's a very real sense that I work for Larry. So, Larry, your breed association has taken a slightly different track than either of the previous two, but it has also recently added molecular breeding values to what they're doing, and so we're eager to hear from you.
Well, thanks, Mike, and it's certainly a pleasure to be visiting with the technicians out in the field this evening. That we have the opportunity as serving on the Ultrasound Guidelines Council board to really provide them with the tools necessary to be successful in their business. And I think that tonight's program and discussing DNA, which in visiting with several ultrasound technicians, this is certainly a concern to them. The adoption and acceptability of this technology, but we certainly feel as the Ultrasound Guidelines Council responsibility to try to educate technicians in regards to DNA technology, and we're certainly making a big step in achieving that here yet tonight. So as Mike mentioned, I'm going to be relaying to you Red Angus's approach to genomic DNA technology. And Red Angus has had a long history of crossbreeding, and Mike, I guess as you can kind of say that Red Angus's approach is kind of a hybrid between Angus and Simmental. As many of you know, Red Angus stakeholders have the ability to access these DNA tests for genomic merit through either Zoetis or directly through the Red Angus Association. And this slide here just breaks down some of the basic similarities as well as differences between those two tests. Here on the left, we see the PF50K, that is the Pfizer 50K, currently called Zoetis, and there on the right is the Red Angus 50K. Obviously, Zoetis developed theirs using their discovery population, where Red Angus chose to develop our own DNA test at the direction of our leadership. And similar to Simmental Association, we went through the MBCC and Mahdi, Sachin, Doherty, and Garrick at Iowa State, and we utilized our own discovery population to develop that test. Both tests are based off of a standard 50K panel. Another difference here for stakeholders that want to utilize the Pfizer test, they work directly through Zoetis. However, those that want Red Angus test work directly to us. The information from both tests are incorporated in the same manner into our EPDs. And just at the bottom there, just a price difference. The Pfizer test includes genomic merit as well as parentage for $75, and the Red Angus test includes the genomic merit, parentage, the genetic defect test of osteopetrosis and monocytosis for a total cost of $80 per animal. As both presenters already discussed, Red Angus is no different in our recognition that DNA information is simply data. And we incorporate that information into our EPD calculations using somewhat of a different measure, different methodology as compared to progeny weights or the actual ultrasound. We utilize a process called blending to incorporate that genomic information into the tested animals' EPDs. And that blending process essentially, very basically, it takes the animal's original EPD or starting EPD and it adjusts that EPD up or down based off of the genomic merit data. And we see increases in accuracy as a result of the incorporation of that genomic data. The one negative on this particular methodology for blending the data is it only impacts the EPD of the tested animal. So it's important to realize that if you test a animal at Red Angus, that it will significantly impact the EPDs and accuracies of that Red Angus animal, but it will not move that information up or down the pedigree. So just a little bit of information or background about the PF50K. It was released by Zoetis in 2012, in September of 2012. We began incorporating that information into our EPDs in December of 12. And the traits impacted by that genomic test are there on your screen, and obviously of most importance to the group tonight is the traits of marbling, yield grade carcass weight, ribeye, and back fat. So those that utilize the PF50K or actually the RA50K gets a very similar report, but this is essentially the example report that we will provide back to the member who utilized this technology. And the above image simply shows the animal's EPD's accuracy and top percent or percent rank previous to the genomic data as well as after the genomic data. So this is very, very clear to the member of what impact that investment in DNA technology resulted in their animals' genetic predictions. As well, we pass on to the member the bottom report. It's a Zoetis report, and it simply relates the percent rank of the genomic component only. So that is only, that percent rank is only against the animals that they have tested in their database, and it only accounts for that genomic merit component. It does not account for the vast amount of phenotypic information that we have in the Red Angus database. As far as how can you tell if an animal has had genomic information incorporated, if it's into its EPDs, on the Red Angus web page, you can search an animal up as you can in all breed associations, and on their information page and the genomic data component will communicate if that animal has PF50K or RA50K data incorporated into its EPDs. So a little about the Red Angus 50K, and maybe just to step back a little bit, our leadership at the point that they wanted to make a significant investment into DNA technology recognized that several DNA companies were either going out of business, changing hands, or just overall experiencing some financial difficulty. And our leadership did not want to essentially tie our wagon to one horse. So they expressed the desire to invest association funds into the development of a 50K test that the association would essentially own the genotypes that was used for the training and validation, as well as not be required to pay any overhead to a DNA company, or we would not expose our stakeholders for paying for the overhead of operating a DNA company. And they essentially just wanted this DNA technology to be stakeholder driven, and wanted our membership to to really buy into it. So we went down the path of developing, in addition to having the PF 50K test, of also developing our own 50K test. We had an effort of collecting samples on animals for the training component of that DNA test. The training was performed, as previously stated, by the NBCC. Our discovery population, so this is the population of animals that we genotype to establish or determine basically the gene effects, and identify which ones are in our population and how they relate to our EPDs. We developed a strategy to identify what animals in our population would do the best job in developing a DNA test that would essentially have the most impact on the EPDs that we calculate. So that process provided us with approximately 1,600 animals that we used to develop our DNA test. And following development of our DNA test, we wanted to ensure that the DNA test that we had developed was what we said it was, or what we thought it was, and we wanted to be able to inform our stakeholders that we had done everything in our abilities to ensure that we had an unbiased evaluation of that DNA test. So we worked with University of Nebraska to perform a validation, and basically we took 250 animals that were not part of the training population. We ran this test on them, and then we were able to, or University of Nebraska was able to determine basically the genetic correlations, as Lauren just talked about, the genetic correlations between those molecular breeding values and the traits of interest. So traits in the RA50K currently are growth and carcass. By the end of summer, we will have the remainder Red Angus EPDs that will be impacted by the genomic information. And so we often get the question of, okay, so we've got to test the PF50K test and the RA50K test. Which one? How do I choose which test to invest in? And we really encourage our stakeholders to consider two things as they make that decision. One, the genetic correlation between the MBV and the trait, which we report to them. Obviously, the higher the correlation, the more genetic variation we're explaining. Therefore, we have a larger increase in accuracy, and also, what traits are included in the respective panels. And these two things to consider are the same in any two DNA test that you're considering using. So here's essentially the results that the University of Nebraska calculated. So these are the genetic correlations between the molecular breeding values and the trait of interest, comparing, this slide very clearly communicates the differences between the RA50K test and the PF50K test. So as you can, kind of scan it down through there, comparing, again, the higher the genetic correlation, the better. Our leadership and our stakeholders certainly are now starting to reap the harvest that they essentially planted in investing in the RA50K test. So we're certainly pleased with these results. Always can be better. We're going to try to make it better, but we sure are happy with where we're starting. So just a couple comments about the future of ultrasound, and a lot of this is going to be very repetitive to what Lauren just shared, but yeah, we're experiencing right now an increase in ultrasound. I have to think that that's partly due to kind of where we're at as an industry, and the financial side of the beef industry looks very promising. Yeah, the nation's cow herd is down, but the country is getting some rain. We certainly feel that our members and our commercial producers are starting to restock. So I think that alone is starting to driving the ultrasound up. But we've got to realize that as this DNA technology becomes more accepted in the industry, more accepted by our membership, we should fully expect a drop in the drop in ultrasound measurements is due to DNA technology. And I think as ultrasound technicians, I think you just need to be educated. I think that a position in dealing with your clients that I probably would not recommend that you throw DNA technology under the bus, but just provide them a way that they can ensure that their operation can take full advantage of the DNA technology, and that's the retraining process that Lauren visited about, that we all will continue to go through. That retraining is based on new data. We have to have new data to go through that retraining. Retraining is simply the discovering of new genes that are created in our populations as our breeders are mating their next generation of cattle. Just part of genetics. We're going to have new genes established. We've got to go through retraining in order to identify those. And the only way we can identify those is if we have the matchup between ultrasound and retraining. So you should, I would encourage you to communicate to your clients that in order for you to be able to, in order for us to find those new genes that are in your population, you've got to continue collecting ultrasound data, and that will ensure that the DNA test will work as well in your operation as it does as everyone else. So I would just close with, taking a proactive stance and educating yourself so you can educate your clients will go a long ways in ensuring your continued success. So with that, Mike, that pretty much finishes up my comments.
Thank you very much, Larry. Before we open it up for questions, I'd like to give Sally and Lauren a chance to speak again if they wish. One disadvantage of being first, one advantage I guess of being first is you get to say what you want, but sometimes when you hear other people talk, you have something else you'd like to add. So Sally or Lauren, if there's something you'd like to add to the conversation before we open it up to questions, I'll give you that opportunity now.
Dr. Tess, I'm good. We can go to questions. This is Sally. I don't have anything else to add.
Okay. How about Lauren?
Just that we just have to, as associations, we have to keep telling our members to collect the phenotypes. Because we will always need the phenotypes.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. Probably the best way to ask a question is on your screen. You should have an ability to click on and raise your hand, so to speak. And when you do that, I can see that your hand is raised, or Kathy Schaefer from the Simmental Association can see that. Brett Setter, I see that your hand is raised. Do you have a question? Oh, he took his hand down. Maybe he doesn't have a question. Anybody else have a question? Well, while the others are thinking, I'll ask one. If you have, this is for each one of you to consider. As an association, as a breed association, what's the most important thing that you would like the ultrasound techs to understand regarding this relationship or the use of DNA and ultrasound to come up with carcass EPDs? Well, you're not going to all talk at once.
Mike, could you expand upon your relationship that you're talking about, so I can a little bit better understand that question?
Well, there's a relationship between DNA and ultrasound and the economic trait that they're both trying to predict. They're both pieces of data. Sally calls them indicator traits that we're using to measure the breeding value for the trait of interest. The ultrasound techs get a variety of questions in the field. Sometimes the questions are pretty off the wall. Sometimes they get comments that are very good. Sometimes they hear things that may or may not be very accurate. We can't expect them to be geneticists, but what would you like them to know and be able to understand, to be able to help breeders in their struggle to understand what's going on?
Dr. Tess, this is Sally. I think I'll start out. I guess some of the key take-home messages is we encourage everyone in our system to focus on the EPDs and not get so bogged down on phenotypic values or ranks, but to look at those EPDs and to encourage that we're using all those sources of information like Lauren described to arrive at that EPD in that complex system.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is Lauren, and I would just like to say, you know, that they have to know that they're both just pieces of information, and they're both used to increase accuracy of an EPD.
So based upon what the two of you have just said, if we want producers to focus on phenotypes and ratios and adjusted values as the end piece of information, would it be similar logic to say that breeders should not also focus on molecular breeding values by themselves?
Oh, that's correct. That's correct. Like, in fact, like, we don't even publish them. We just include them in into the EPD and just leave it as that.
Okay.
We do not publish the molecular breeding values either, Mike.
Mm-hmm. Well, I noticed that in that report that you send out to your breeders, Larry, that it did have the percentile values for the molecular breeding values, I thought, on there.
Yes, it does, and you know, in an ideal world, we probably wouldn't even provide that, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, maybe in the future that report, you know, it may go away as well.
Okay.
And Mike, I would agree with Larry on that. I mean, we do report ranks, but our weekly evaluations have pushed our breeders more so away from that, and we do not provide molecular breeding values back to the customer.
Okay. All right. Well, each of you have touched on this some. I think Larry talked about it quite a bit, about why the Red Angus Association chose the path they did. Sally, your breed association was the first to get into this game. and now works with 2 private companies. Would you like to comment about why you've chosen this particular path and what advantages or disadvantages you see to that for your association and its members?
Sure. Yeah, we established our system to handle DNA technology in 2007, and one of the reasons that we did that is because the individual companies were becoming involved in providing molecular breeding values that we just spoke to registered cattle breeders. And so we wanted to ensure, our leadership wanted to ensure that the genomic results were incorporated into the EPDs, as Lauren described, as that whole BIF approach. And so we definitely wanted to keep our foot in the door. We started out with Igenity in 2009 and then picked up what was then Pfizer, now Zoetis, to make that a competitive piece. Now more recently, we're able to work towards a nice overarching approach where we warehouse coming up on about 40,000, 50K genotypes in-house with the capabilities to run that through an algorithm in-house to do those molecular breeding value predictions with our research collaborators. And so that's given us a lot more flexibility as we've gravitated through this whole system over time. And so we've gone through some growing pains, but we've had that opportunity to work towards a more seamless approach where we could do those molecular breeding value predictions in-house at a speed that we liked for weekly.
Lauren, any other comments from you about why Simmental has chosen the path that they've taken?
Well, I think essentially I wasn't really that much in on the decision, but I think it was just a way to kind of foster competition among all the companies that were doing it, as well as having us, like, we wanted to be I guess the caretaker, say, of our members' data. We didn't want it to be part, you know, like owned by a private company. We wanted to be able to manage that for our members ourselves and have the opportunity to do additional research on it if we'd like. So I think that's why we chose the path that we did.
Okay. All right, I can see that we have a few questions now. Will and Bonnie Larson, I've unmuted your mic. If you can ask your question, go ahead.
Well, will the DNA become more accurate, or will the correlations get higher as more samples are collected, or not?
Okay, I'm going to repeat the question just in case everybody didn't hear it. Bonnie asked if the DNA will become more accurate, will the genetic correlations get higher as more samples are collected, more information is gathered. So who wants to tackle that?
I guess I'll start, Mike. I mean, when we went through our second calibration, the first of this year, we saw those correlations bump up about 10% across the board, some stronger in certain traits versus others. So our correlations sit at 0.6 to 0.7 across the traits now with that approach. And we'll be coming up on a third calibration the end of this year, and so where we'll utilize, say, 30,000 plus 50K genotypes in that. We might expect a little bit of bump in that, but I don't think that the sizable jumps that we saw initially when our first calibration was with less than 10,000.
Okay.
Yeah, I would certainly expect Sally to be a kind of a diminishing return. That you know, eventually you get so many phenotypes and genotypes that you just can't learn a heck of a lot more about it. Now, I think we'll see Bonnie even higher correlations, or actually probably better said, the DNA technology being more informative, is when the DNA technology itself evolves to the point to where it can identify the actual causal mutation that is having the impact, the direct impact on the trait of interest. So I think where we'll see the major bumps in genetic correlations is as the technology advances.
Okay. Rethel, I see you have a question. If you can hear me, ask your question.
Who are you talking to, Mike?
Rethel King.
Oh, all right. Sorry, I didn't hear it all. As an ultrasound technology company, when we test software, we test against actual carcass information. And the question that I have asked to me a lot is how accurate or how is DNA technology being tested? Is it compared to actual carcass information, or is it based on EPDs?
Okay, thank you, Rethel. I'll repeat the question. Rethel King asked, said, Rethel owns one of the UGC labs. He said that when they test ultrasound software and technology, they compare it against actual carcass data. And he asked the question, how is the DNA technology tested? Is it tested against actual carcass data or EPDs or what? I hope I got that reasonably asked, Rethel. Who would like to tackle that?
I'll take a stab at it, and then Sally and Lauren can tell us the correct answer. But I think we can't make direct comparisons against those two comparisons. With ultrasound technology, we are trying to to very accurately measure from the outside of that animal what is laying underneath. To where in the DNA component, we're estimating the animal's genetic merit. We're not measuring what the animal has, but we're measuring, or as far as the phenotype, but we're measuring what the animal's genetics are that have a significant contribution towards that phenotype. So to answer your question, the DNA technology, we compare the DNA technology to the EPDs. Now, there should be some comfort in realizing that all three here on the phone tonight, our EPDs, our carcass EPDs, contain a very significant large amount of actual ultrasound data, and that is what we are attempting to predict the animal's genetic merit for, is that actual carcass genetics. So indirectly, yes, it's compared against the actual carcass records because they are extremely influential into the EPD calculations for CarcassTraits.
Yeah, this is Sally. Just to comment, go ahead, Lauren.
Oh, well, I was just going to add one thing, that with the validation process, most of it is validated mostly against EPDs, but phenotypes can be used. So they could be able to do it with actual carcass data, but as Larry said, the actual carcass data is in those EPDs as well. So
just to comment, if y'all can hear me, on our approach, those correlations, I mean, Lauren reported some, and I mentioned that our correlations as well. We establish those by taking the genomic result and throwing it against our phenotypic carcass harvest database and estimating those genetic correlations. We also go through and throw it against the ultrasound phenotypes and estimate those genetic correlations. And we do that through AGI. We're the litmus test on that with our researchers here. And so even if the company has put out results for those correlations, ours are ultimately the ones that are used in the evaluation. And yes, they are put up against the phenotypes to express that.
J.R. Tate, I see that you have a hand up. Can you ask your question? If you go ahead, if you can hear me.
Yeah, I just, all three speakers talked about how the DNA technologies are being recalibrated and new relationships are estimated on a pretty regular basis. And I wondered if each of the speakers would address when the last time they calculated the associations between ultrasound and carcass traits, and if they may be doing updates to those estimates in the future.
Thank you, J.R. Could all of you hear J.R. okay?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just go ahead. I won't try to repeat the question then.
Yeah, this is Lauren. So J.R., are you wondering about the genetic correlations between the traits? Is that what you're getting at, or looking at the heritabilities and genetic correlations?
I think so. That's probably what he's after. I've got him muted. I'll have to unmute him.
Oh, okay, okay. I think...
that was basically it, Lauren.
Okay, okay. I know they haven't been done since I've been on board, which was fall of 2010. But I think they were last done probably 2005 to 2007, although don't quote me on that. And we do have in our plans with both the ASA and Red Angus Association to revisit those soon, using probably Colorado State University, but we haven't done anything about that yet. That's kind of been put on a back burner.
This is Sal. Go ahead.
Ladies first.
There's a delay. Sorry about that, Larry. This is Sally. And JR, when we go through and do our variance component estimation, that last calibration was pretty much the end of 2012. And so we go through and re-estimate all those relationships, not only for scan and carcass and then those relationships back to the genomics, but we do that across the whole suite of traits because we've added additional data and grow those resources. So we review those each time, and we're shooting to do that again coming up the end of this year.
JR, as you likely know, Red Angus and Simmental combines their data and calculates the multi-breed evaluation. So we essentially utilize the genetic correlations and all the parameters in that evaluation. In 2009, we calculated the correlations, the parameters on all of our traits at CSU. That was prior to Red Angus and Simmental coming together for evaluation purposes. The correlations that we come up with there, though, were very similar to what we utilize for the multi-breed evaluation now. So it was roughly 2009 the last time that those were calculated on the Red Angus database, but
I'm not seeing any other questions. Kathy, are you seeing any?
I still see one with Rethel King. I don't know if his hand is still up from before.
Okay, I'll see if I can find him here.
And then, yeah, that looks like it.
Rethel, do you still have a question?
No, it's been answered, Mike.
Okay.
Okay.
Sean Nicholson.
Mm-hmm.
I can't seem to unmute Sean.
Let me try.
Okay. I can't seem to get him. Sean, I can see your hand up, but I can't talk to you.
We have a little question thing that you can type into, Sean.
Sean, if you could type your question in the chat line, maybe that would work, but I can't seem to. Apparently, it says you're self-muted. Press *6, see if that helps you, Sean.
Or just click on the little microphone.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry, I can't hear him.
Huh. Yep,
Do you see any other questions?
No, that's it. Sean?
Well,
yeah, that was it. Is that him?
Yeah. Well, I think with that, maybe we'll call it a night. I want to thank Sally and Lauren and Larry for spending the time with us and agreeing to speak. And I know each of you are very busy people, and thank you very much. Thanks again to the Tech Committee for designing the program.